big fan my entire life, as you can see. I don't know which direction I'm facing. Yeah, over here. I've probably put some of your kids through college, so I would say I appreciate you.
There's a lot of kids, but thank you. I appreciate that.
So I guess the first question is, like, how was the experience of being the first American film shot in Romania, like post-communism? And did that culture kind of affect the movie, or did it sort of seep into any of the execution?
For sure. We were, and I got to bring Ted Nicolau into this, who was my cohort partner, the writer of the script, even though I had the basic concept. And, you know, he was the first guy to go to Romania after the fall of Ceausescu and shoot Subspecies. So the adventure, you know, it was, I mean, we had shot together previously when I owned the studio in the 80s, the ex-Dino De Laurentiis studio. So, you know, he'd already been to Europe for movies like TerraVision and others that we did back in the 80s. And, you know, I am sort of fearless about third world countries. To me, it's like, let's do it, the adventure. I knew Bucharest would be amazing, even though it was scary for a lot of people. This was literally after the fall of Ceausescu. The country was just coming out of a really black, dark period, communism. I mean, the place was just sucked dry of anything light and any riches. People were super impoverished. But what I loved about it is the spirit of the people were amazing. When I first went over there and met some of the people we'd be working with. And Bucharest used to be known as the Little Paris. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful city. So I saw all sorts of opportunity, you know, for movies that I want to make there. I mean, I had all these ambitious plans, but it was all about, let's see how this first one goes. It was a co-production between between Full Moon and a Romanian company. And they had access to essentially the state-owned studio, which was a big mausoleum type looking studio facility that you know, turned out Romanian movies and some soap operas during the Ceausescu reign, during communism. Because if one thing you could say about Ceausescu and his wife, both murdered by the revolutionaries, is they were into the arts. So movies still got made over there. They had quite a scene for theaters. So people who were involved in the arts were, you know, somewhat revered, and they worked. It wasn't like they stamped out everything. So we found you know, amazing craftspeople and all that kind of stuff. And we hooked up with one fellow who later became my partner in building a full-on studio there. But going back to the original vibe, it was pretty austere. We wanted to shoot some of the scenes in Transylvania. We quickly found that the Romanians kind of laugh at Western culture's obsession with vampires. To them, it's, yeah, there was some history up in Transylvania, but, you know, not like the way we talk about it here. But the place was haunting and beautiful, and back in those days, completely available to an American film company for very little money. You know, we can never replicate that today. So we were at the right place at the right time. And the influence of just not only the locations, but the vibe of Romania at that time was, I think it's heavily in this movie, because we had actors who were nervous about being there, and locations that, again, were rare. Can't even rent them anymore today because we got into everywhere. It was pretty much an open deal. And of course, there were frustrations. It was a 4-week shoot that turned into 8 weeks. It's one thing when you have a small company and you're behind a few days, okay, you put in a little contingency in your budget, but to double the shooting time, this wasn't any of our faults. It's just everything moved very slowly over there. But it was a unique and wonderful experience, which led the way to my wanting to make more movies there, my coming up with the idea to build a studio there, which we did. And then Ted going back and shooting shortly thereafter, Subspecies 2 and 3 back to back. And then the first movie I shot there, that we shot there on the land that became the studio, which is now called Castel Films, was Oblivion 1 and 2. It was a very active period for Full Moon in the early 90s anyway. We were shooting movies here in Italy and now in Romania.
Another one I'd like to actually get to, I think is one of the best series, is the sci-fi actioner Trancers.
Right.
And that's one of, I feel like you and Tim Thomerson are probably perfect together, that and Dollman, of course. So I guess what I want to talk about is there any entry that you're particularly proud of, especially because I feel like with actioners and sci-fi, even as a low budget company, there's just a lot of hurdles to get through. And since there are some of your older series kind of coming back, I know that the Puppet Masters are rocking back out.
Right.
Radu's showing back up. Is there ever a chance that there could be like an Old Man Jack entry anytime soon?
You know, it's funny. I got stuff on my desk. I should have at least put this up. You know, we have all these amazing masks that we've produced that have really been doing very well. So we just happened to recently come out with a Radu mask. And of course, we have Blade. And I don't know if anybody can see any of this with the reflection.
Castle Freaks. Yeah.
And Killjoy. And then we have a bunch of little, I got to do this not to forget. And we have a bunch of little action figures now. We start off already with Blade and the Laser Blast dude. Now we have, what do we have? Torch and Jester and little Chuck Connors from Tourist Trap. They're all coming out next week, literally, on fullmoondirect.com. So there's a lot going on with Trancers, and it's a bummer that I'm not allowed to say the name of the studio, but a major studio optioned the rights to make Trancers as a big theatrical tentpole movie. And we, you know, Quentin Tarantino's talked about it. He did a podcast recently talking about how cool Trancers is and how great it would be as a, you know, a remake in the hands of, you know, lots of money in a big studio. Anyway, so Trancers, I think they're going to announce it soon. And then people, unless it doesn't happen, because these are always option deals. You don't know, you get option money and they talk about how it's going to be awesome. And then you hope that they actually make the movie. But it seems like it's happening. So Trancers may very well be announced by the end of the year, if not in January, as a big major studio production, which would be fantastic because it will pull a lot of what we do, which is still somewhat, I don't want to say underground, but, you know, we're not in the mainstream. You know, we Full Moon, the last time Full Moon made sort of mainstream movies and had some major distribution was literally 40 years ago. The Empire films, Ghoulies. I made a movie called Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin, which came out through Universal. But, you know, Empire Full Moon, you know, have been pretty well known for people who went to the video store and who know how to find these movies. But I think in the next year or two, we'll be seeing a few of these shows remade, hopefully well, and we can hope the best, and released, you know, now suddenly I say release theatrically, like that can happen. I don't know. That's a whole new conundrum as far as what gets made and what gets released. But I think Full Moon's entering an era where the Full Moon universe and all the characters and franchises, I mean, there are many dating back to the 70s, have a good chance of kind of re-emerging on either major networks or in some cases on limited theatrical releases. And that's going to be really cool.
I remember I got the DVD of the City of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
A little while back. So I guess my question would be, that was a rare short that you had to kind of dig up, correct? That came from like an anthology.
Yeah.
So what was the process of actually finally getting that released? And is there anything else you have kind of like that? Is there any other shorts or random things that you know?
I'll first start with the appendage of what that was and what we will get out one day soon. And that is, so back in the late 80s, as I was winding down with the studio in Italy, which was outside of Rome, the Ex Dino De Laurentiis studios, we were making some really cool movies at that studio. It was briefly three and a half years, the Empire Studios. And we made, you know, From Beyond and Dolls and Troll and other movies during that period. And I wanted to treat myself to at least being able to direct one movie because I was more like the traffic cop guy and that wasn't my super dream. But keeping all that alive was taking all my ability to juggle, and then it eventually ended and I was sort of forced to sell Empire. And 1 month later, I started Full Moon. So it was a pretty fast transition. But the movie I decided to make was called Pulse Pounders. And the idea of Pulse Pounders was it was going to be 3 sequels, a trilogy, to successful prior movies of mine. So one was going to be a sequel to Trancers, which I shot. The other one's going to be essentially another Lovecraft story with Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, which we shot. It was called The Evil Clergyman. And the third one was a kind of a little sequel to Dungeon Master, which is a movie with Richard Mall that I made in the early 80s. And I shot that as well. The problem is the only time it's ever happened in my crazy long career is that the negative was lost. The Pulse Pounders trilogy. So what we had to do is, from dailies and old VHS tapes, we had to kind of piece it together and finish it. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, we did a pretty good job of cleaning it up, but it's not, we'll never be able to release a Blu-ray because the source material basically came from a VHS tape that was basically copies of the dailies that I would look at back in the day. You know, you shot it back then, you shot on 35, you saw your material, you either screened it, which I did a lot, but sometimes for convenience, the lab puts it on a VHS tape. So we literally had to reconstruct from a rough cut, blah, 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 technical talk. But I managed to clean up and finish the 2.0 mini sequel to Trancers called City of Lost Angels, where I flew the whole cast over. I mean, Thomerson, Helen Hunt, Art LaFleur, all of them. And I was able to finish The Evil Clergyman, which I'm really proud of. I love it. We got David Warner in there for one of the other players in the show. It's really worth watching. Also available, all this, of course, everything I'm talking about is on fullmoonfeatures.com, where you go to our app and you can sign up and watch it wherever, or you can go to our channel on Amazon, which is, you go to the add-on subscription Amazon channels, and Full Moon Features is there as well. The only difference is, of course, Amazon is awesome, but they won't let everything on it. So some of our more risque titles that we're known for don't make it on Amazon, whereas Full Moon Features, it's easier for us. And, you know, you can get it on Xbox, on Google, on Apple TV, you know, you can go online, fullmoonfeatures.com. So both of these mini sequels, which were going to be part of Pulse Pounders, the trilogy, are both available, and we finished them as best as we can. Now, Dungeon Master had additional issues where there was some stop motion animation that we never were able to finish. It's a little trickier to find a way to finish that, and we may one day do that. And who knows, maybe the negative will turn up one day, unlikely, and we can finish the whole thing in 35 and blah, blah, blah. But it's a very interesting sort of little story, but I didn't want those things to be buried forever. So we worked hard to finish it. Now, the other thing that, just apropos something that hasn't been finished, that will be done next year, which is gargantuan, awesome, and the most expensive thing Full Moon has ever done with the longest history, is a movie called The Primevals.
Yes, because you, am I correct that, did you debut that trailer at Flashback Weekend, or did you do it somewhere else?
Possibly. You mean the Primevals?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because we tried last year to raise a little money to help finish it from Kickstarter. It was sort of a Kickstarter campaign. The Primeval story would take 5 of these episodes. I'm going to give you literally the 2-minute version.
Yeah.
The best part of it is when it's done, and it will be done finally next week, and after 50 years, 50, not 5, 50 years, it will be, and I'm not saying this to be boastful, it'll be the coolest thing and the closest thing to a great Ray Harryhausen film made in the 60s and 70s, which was a big motivator for me, whether it's Jason and the Argonauts or the Seven Voyages Sinbad. You know, give me something with magical animation, stop motion animation, I'm there. So the long story short is, in the 70s, I started making small movies, and I had this movie that I made that I was going to make called Laser Blast, and I needed these alien guys to have a couple of appearances in this movie. And I got wind that Ray Harryhausen's protege, a fellow named David Allen, had a studio and was surviving by making mainly commercials, like little shots for commercials. If you were around back then and you saw the Pillsbury Doughboy commercial back in the 60s, that was stop motion animation. Today, everything's CGI. So anyway, I got in touch with and met David Allen, who was a maestro. The people in his studio at the time, there's like 5 other people working with him. I wish I remember the names, but these are people who went on to run ILM. You know, his little team became, each one, super successful. And I began a relationship with Dave, and he did the stop motion for the first stop motion shots for my first stop motion movie called, not stop motion movie that had stop motion, called Laser Blast. If you ever saw Laser Blast, those weird little aliens who lose the gun and they come and pick it up, and that's those stop motion shots, which are pretty cool and kind of funny, were created by David Allen. As a matter of fact, as an aside, Mystery Science Theater, their most successful episode in their first season was their spiff, or their spoof rather, on Laser Blast, because people love the movie and love, you know, how they made fun of it. Anyway, that began a relationship with Dave Allen. And Dave Allen, in that first meeting, said, hey, if anything goes amazing for you and you make a lot of money. This is my pet project. This is something I would die for if you can afford the millions of dollars it will cost. And he pulled out a this was like 75, 76. He pulled out a 1969-ish copy of Cinefantastique. And on the cover of that magazine was a beautiful rendering of part of his vision for a movie called The Primevals, which is sort of a Lost Horizons story, except when the people discover this valley in the Himalayas, they're aliens, but they've all sort of degenerated because of it. I can't tell you the story, but it's super duper cool. So I looked and said, wow, David, this is awesome. And man, he said, yeah, it's like, 250, 300 stop motion shots. It'll take me 12 weeks. Everything that sounds like that will never happen in my lifetime. To get those 8 or 10 stop motion shots for Laser Blast was probably half the budget of the little movie I made, Laser Blast. And the timeline is also lengthy. So I developed this relationship with Dave Allen. I'm giving you, this is not the 3-minute version. I think this is the 6-minute version.
This is good. This is good. I like this. I feel like I'm getting a history lesson. I like this.
Well, it's going to dissolve into now and next year. So anyway, every time I would meet with Dave with another project that I needed his help with, like Puppet Master, the stop motion shots in Puppet Master are all Dave Allen's. Before that, Dolls, Stuart Gordon's Dolls, anything stop motion was Dave and Allen, so forth and so on. Over the many years, Dave would sit me down, he'd pull out the Primevals thing, and he'd go, Charlie, done a lot of shows for you now. When can we make Primevals? I said, Dave, I've got to have a lot of money. You want 12 weeks? Yeah, he said, but I think Full Moon's doing pretty well. So I said, one day I'm going to try to make it happen. Anyway, many movies later, it was now in the early to mid 90s. I had built a studio in Romania, which was doing well, and we were making lots and lots of movies. This is like the heyday of direct-to-video. I had a deal with Paramount, and there was money. And I sat with Dave. I said, Dave, this is a good news day. We're going to make the Primevals. And he goes, oh my God, how and where? And I said, well, I'm going to give you what you want, 12 weeks. My dad, who was my super, he worked for me for many years at the end of his whole amazing career. He used to call it reverse nepotism, but he was the guy who was the best person to have on set as a line producer who would be there with a director, especially first time novice director. He and Stuart Gordon became very close. My dad was there from Reanimator to From Beyond to Dolls to Robot Jocks. Because, a talented producer like director like Stuart needs a creative producer who can go in there in the right way, say, Stuart, I think you've got what you need. We don't need to shoot another day and break the bank, but do it in a way that's creative, where it's not like shut things down and all this stuff, because most producers today, they have no training. My dad was a director, worked with amazing actors, and knows how to talk to people. So he was a diplomat. So he and Stuart got along great. And I said, Dad, you got a bigger challenge. David Allen, who had never, he directed Puppet Master 2. I gave him that before Primevals because it kind of made sense. But Dave wants to make Gone with the Wind on our little budget, 12 weeks, 300 stop motion or close to it animation shots, which will take 2 years after the movie wraps. After you spend all the money for 12 weeks making a movie, 2 years to make those stop motion shots. You're lucky if you get 2 a week. So I said, Dad, you really need to stick with Dave. So we began that adventure. It was 12 weeks. We built sets in Romania at the studio. We went to the Italian Dolomites. We shot almost all over Europe. The movie was finally in the can, so to speak. 12 weeks of photography, looks amazing. Dave Allen had every shot storyboarded. And then back in LA began the process of making for 2 years, 280 amazing stop motion animation shots. And every bit as crazy and as spellbinding and as magical as anything at Ray Harryhausen ever did. And it was ambitious. There were arenas and yetis and lizard creatures. And anyway, about 150 shots into that post-production deal, Dave Allen died of cancer. And it was at the same time where things were going a little more difficultly for Full Moon. We were no longer distributed by Paramount. Market conditions changed things. Romania wasn't so great anymore. And there was no one to take Dave's place. I mean, Dave had a wonderful protege, a guy named Chris Endicott, but it was too early in his sort of career for him to take this over. I had to get rid of the studio we had here locally near Glendale. So all we could do is put Dave Allen's Primevals, all the money we spent, which was the most expensive movie we ever made, basically in storage. The whole thing sat in storage until 2 years ago when we had the Where for All, now that streaming's helping us a bit. And Chris Endicott came back and we had a clever way to finish the movie. And it's been 2 years now that Chris has been turning out some amazing shots at his studio here in the Valley. He's rallied people who are working for close to free just because of the spirit of this project that started in the late 60s. And we're only about 30 shots away from being done. So sometime in May or June next year, the Primevals will be out. Where it comes out first, what venue, how we do it, because it needs to be treated very specially. It's not like a direct throw it on streaming. It's got to be, we'll see what happens with the world, but it looks amazing.
I was going to say, I really appreciate this. It's been an experience. This is really cool, man. Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, I'll admit something. I'm so in the moment and so into what I'm doing. I never watch any of this. I'm not online. I have a Facebook page that someone else writes for. I mean, I'm terrible. I want to admit this to the fans. I'm so into the moment and creating stuff. I don't, unless I get a link. So at some point you got to send me a link so I can watch something you do. Because otherwise, I mean, I'm on emails and I'm inventing weird shit and I'm trying to, you know what I'm saying? It's really sad to say this. I should be like, I'm a social media guy. I'm not at all. I'm clueless.
Well, I will. Not a problem. You keep making, keep rocking out, you know?
I will. And you guys out there, look, there's only a few of us. Support fullmoonfeatures.com. I mean, that's our video store. And we're putting everything into it, hoping one day we'll have, you know, 0.1% of Netflix, you know, so we have a few 100,000 subscribers, which would allow us to make the movies we were making in the 80s and 90s. I get a lot of posts and letters and people send to me saying, well, how come you can't make exactly the movies like in the 80s? I'm sorry, I'm going on forever here, but I got to make this point. And it's like, well, we're doing the best we can, but in the 80s, our average budget in the 80s was about $900,000. And in the 90s, it was $600,000. And today it's $100,000. Now we're clever today and we have friends and resources and, you know, post-production is easy. We're not shooting on film, but, you know, my dream is to get enough subscribers so we have enough money to make, you know, the kind of movies I want to make that are not overblown, stupid, expensive movies, but have a little more meat on their bones. And that's the world we live in. We're no longer in the video world. So that's it. So, and anybody else is doing this. I mean, I don't know if Troma's got a site. I don't pay attention, but the few people who have an independent streaming site, if we're ever gone one day, which will never happen, knock on no wood here, but then all that will be left will be, and not saying that they're doing a bad job, Netflix, Hulu, those sites, Amazon. And the problem is that the coolest, most clever movies that I think have been made over the last 40 years that we all fell in love with as kids would never have been made through a major network or a major cable network. These are oddball, weird movies that a filmmaker goes, you know, I can scrape this thing together and I can make a Halloween or I can make whatever the movies are. I can make these clever movies. Once that goes away and those independents are no longer making movies, it'll be a bummer because then it'll just be, you know, the 6 or 7 big streaming sites. And that's not going to get these kind of movies made. Speech is over. Speaking of awesome movie makers, dude, we publish every 3 months Delirium magazine. You probably know about this. And this is one of my favorite filmmakers who was an awesome subject for our cover.
John Waters.
So, yeah. So, you know, tune into Full Moon and all this stuff is here, but support fullmoonfeatures.com.